internationally and locally. And this is something that we can explore. But I wanted to bridge to the next question with the idea of being a critical friend to the policymaker, or bringing that independence and the customization that really can hopefully speak to the policymaker. So on the theme of bridging from research, knowledge, and policy, and how to collaborate with policymakers, let me start with Corey. And then I will continue with Mavis on that same theme. Both of you have different experience of having been on both ends of the story, producers and receivers. So, Corey, with your insider view of how a policymaker works, how the insider works, what would be your advice for the center? What would be the key things that you think need to be done? What are the do's, like you think and do tank, and what are the don'ts? So 3 minutes for you, Corey, and then we'll come with a similar question to you, Mavis.
Well, back to a little bit maybe more elaboration really on what I spoke a minute ago, but maybe through some examples. For example, again, economists tend to talk about what has been researched, right, and what is known. But we go through waves. Like, I was Minister of Energy at a time when, this was the early 2000s, when there was absolutely no view that anything that is decided by markets should be influenced by governments. Yet I needed to privatize or restructure or decide what to do with the oil industry, which was in public hands. And at that time, I could not get advice from the World Bank, and I could only deal with investment banks and so on. And I felt that I wanted development advice. I think the bank is now returning to that space. But as I say, again, that is really what I think, especially less developed, I mean, lower income countries, but certainly also middle income countries deal with the most. And I apologize, there are many topics, and for example, in education reform or monetary policy, there is a lot of immediately applicable knowledge out there. But I, as I said, switched from macro to production, structure to transformation. And I really think there is still a very limited amount of knowledge there. Okay, probably today the bank would help me with even the restructuring, privatization of the oil company. I hope so. At the time, I could do electricity. And even mining, which was in my portfolio, I couldn't get any advice. Anyway, so I think it is important, and that the World Development Reports are fantastic. When they take a topic, they do what I'm saying. They actually codify experiences from all sorts of angles. But my hope would be for the center to try to find ways to transform it into less one-off events, to basically take a World Development Report, and maybe you do it. And I apologize, I don't know the insides of how DEC works, but in general, that's not how economics and economists work. It's a continuous team effort to keep adding and codifying these stylized facts that have been once established, to continue monitoring them. And obviously, it cannot be done about everything. But now that the bank and the world are going back to thinking about the fact that even education policy and investment, everything is actually industrial policy. Please go back to codifying what happens in the transformation that economic growth brings. It's still a black box, and honestly, we do it to the best of our ability in the think tank, and I basically went that way out of pure curiosity initially. But we've had a very hard time finding examples because, yes, other institutions do it. Those are usually national institutions, statistics, development institutions. You need to bridge language barriers. you need to spend a lot of time researching and research. If DEC can help us, those of us who want to be comparing experiences in growth and transformation and development, now with AI that can translate like this and so on, to just put similar situations together. And again, it boils down to stylized facts. Talking about China in Serbia doesn't help me too much. It's too big.
Thank you, Cory, for, giving us a sobering feedback about the World Bank, but also to highlighting how curating and bridging knowledge is a work in progress, because it's a moving target both on the side of the policymaker but also on the side of the knowledge. And I think you're going to enjoy tomorrow, because tomorrow in the brainstorming of the World Development Report on Growth, that's exactly what we'll be discussing in terms of what are the transformations that growth brings to development. But let me turn to Mavis, who also brings this dual experience of having worked in government and being now head of a research institute of the African Center for Economic Transformation. How do you see the outreach, the success, and the impact to the policymakers in your region? Over to you, Mavis.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to begin by giving a bit of a context. So the same way knowledge makers and brokers are a myriad of institutions, so are policymakers. So if you go into a typical policy-making system, you know we have the politicians, who are, if you want to get through a politician, literally, I learned as a civil servant, more than one page, they don't listen. So, and then you have the technocrats within the system. They need a different set of products. And then you need the researchers within the system. Currently, I think we all tailor our work to the researchers and to a degree the technocrats, but we don't link all three. And that's something that we need to think through. But coming back to the point that Indamit made right at the beginning, which was that we are in a very complex world, which means that the knowledge we are curating and the information and the data need to be real, and it needs to be able to engage with policymakers in their different iterations. So I just want to talk you through very quickly a tool that we've created at ASSET called the Pan-African Coalition for Transformation. And the PACT tool is something we started piloting about a year ago. And what we do is we start with a piece of research, so say the WDR, and we have a group of countries that have a specific interest in the issue, and we bring policymakers at the different level with the research institutions over a 12 to 24-month period. Okay? So we do the initial deep dive analysis into the country. Then the researchers are available to work through the different iterations of need with the different levels of policymakers over that time period. And then we facilitate peer-to-peer learning. So for example, if Tanzania figures out how to crack an industrial policy in a way that gets a minister to listen to them, they then advise Ghana. And what we've learned is that actually the policymakers listen to each other more than they do us. So we play more of a facilitation role, making sure the information is moving to the right places. We are available to support research and analysis. And we don't do it ourselves. We do it through the local researchers and local institutes in those countries. So we play more of a back role. And because it's iterative and it's ongoing, we actually see a lot more uptake in terms of research into policy than we've seen in the 13 years we've existed thus far. It's an expensive process, but it's a lot cheaper, we've found, than sitting in government ministries and often getting, we do a lot of work and then we leave and then everything dies. We found that in packed chapters that have closed, those governments are linking up to each other and the researchers continue to work with each other. But the most exciting thing we've learned is competition. Okay. One government does not like to see another government do better. One country does not like to see another government do better. So that peer-to-peer learning is also instigating competition that is facilitating uptake in a way that we haven't seen in the past. So I just wanted to share that experience. And I think the bank through DEC and our country offices, etc., could play a really important role in facilitating such processes and sharing data.
Thank you, Mavis, for bringing like a very practical perspective to the delivery system that Jero was talking about, because you're really talking about profiling your audience and then customizing the delivery to that audience and being aware of how that goes. I love the idea of the peer-to-peer learning, which really taps on trust, but also the one of a competition. And one of the products that DEC in the World Bank will put out is this Be Ready, which is based conceptually on the idea of a virtuous competition across countries. But we focused our first question on the how of the bridging, but there's also the what, or maybe if I could say better, the so what. So how is DEC Global going to be relevant? How is it going to produce that knowledge on demand? What Corey was saying, you know, I needed advice on how to go about the oil privatization. Was I doing it right? What would the economics say? What are the other experiences? So let me start with Theophile and sort of asking him how, from his experience, he sees that DEC Global can really bring that on-demand expertise and can pass the relevance test. And then I'll come back to you, Mavis, to sort of reflect on the same question. Over to you, Theophile.
Thank you. This is a very interesting question. You know, I have been in academia for many years, and I used to say that I have already had 7 lives, you know, and I have yeah, 2 to go, right? Yeah, and I have done this kind of research, you know, in academia, which is not demand-driven on the ground, right? And but let me make justice to my colleague. Still doing this kind of research, you know, because, you know, knowledge generation is tough, difficult, you know. And when we are in academia, the only thing we want to do is to publish papers, right? To publish in top journals, Econometrica, American Economic Review, Quarterly Journals of Economics, and so we only dream about these top journals. But then I move away from academia, and because I think it's even better, you know, when it comes to research to address the on-the-ground demand, as you mentioned. And because at the end of the day, what we want to do is to improve the life of people. What is research if it is not used, right? And that's what you mentioned, Jiro. Knowledge is power, but without use, it is useless, right? And I agree with that. So I think to maintain relevance, and DEC Global should consider several factors when creating knowledge products and training materials. Let me just highlight some of them. Okay, 5. 1, inclusion and participation, and engaging with policymakers, practitioners, local researchers, civil society organizations, and other relevant actors in the target countries during the design and development process. And this can help the global, I think, better understand the specific challenges and needs on the ground. Second, contextual analysis. Conducting thorough research on the economic, social, and political context of the target countries will enable DEC Global to tailor its content and to address specific developmental challenges, policy priorities, and institutional frameworks, I think so. Third, needs assessment. Conducting comprehensive need assessment in collaboration with organizations and researchers, will help DEC to identify specific areas where policymakers and partnerships require support, and to develop content that directly addresses those needs. Fourth, collaborative partnerships. I think by partnering with local researchers, institutions, think tanks, universities, and policy organizations in the target countries, DEC Global can ensure that its products and training materials are aligned with local demand. And five, lastly, continuous feedback mechanism. I think so. For that, we need to establish mechanisms to collect feedback from users, including policymakers and practitioners, and this can help DEC Global to make iterative improvements and adaptation to ensure that its contents remain responsive to evolving needs. So I think by integrating these strategies, DEC Global can create demand-driven, contextually relevant, and tailor knowledge products and training materials that are more likely to have positive impacts on development outcomes.
Thank you, Théophile, for laying out these very practical steps and going back to this idea of an iterative adaptation. And you, Mavis, you touched already about that iteration, a sort of feedback process. So what more would you like to sort of bring to light for DEC Global on this question?
I'd like to begin by fully endorsing everything that Théophile has said. It's really important, those 5 points. I would add 2 things. One is, please don't lose the foresight research, the futuristic, the looking forward. I think we need academia to stay in that space so that we, when the world changes, we have something to draw on. So that has to stay. But the thing that I'd like to bring is that DEC Global sits in a very complex web of knowledge generators, okay? Let's move away from, your little strip in Washington where you have the fund and the bank, and let's just go into 1818H, okay? The number of data and information that is generated there that gets thrown at countries is a lot. And so if you could start by doing some level of collaboration, alignment, structuring in-house before it comes into a country, it would help endlessly. And the number of times I read contradictory reports from different parts of the bank for a country is very worrying. And a piece of advice that a minister of finance once gave me, he said, "You guys are fun. Do you know it's very easy to ignore you?" And I said, "Honorable Minister, why?" He says, "Today you walk in, you say A. Somebody else walks in and says B. The next walks in and says C. And me and my small office, I pick what I want and what I don't want. And it's done intentionally. So it's a knowledgeable decision that is being made. So the onus is on us as knowledge makers and knowledge brokers to really streamline and focus. And I think if DEC Global starts by coordinating in-house, so starting with Africa, let me talk about Africa where I'm currently sitting. So how you work with the different arms of Africa, not just the chief economist office, but the different teams in Africa who are all generating report for a specific country, streamlining it and agreeing a process of how that information is then, disseminated is a terrible word because it doesn't work. Whatever we want to use, integrated into a national system is really important. And then very quickly, the second point is there is the national side and there's also the regional agenda. And on the continent, we are asking our countries to think locally but act regionally, and we really need data and information to drive that discourse. What does success look like, not just at the national level, but also at a regional level on a continent that is trying to build the world's largest market? Where are the pockets of excellence? Where do you grow? What does industrialization look like, etc.?
Thank you, Mavis. I like how, while we're talking about how to bridge between knowledge and policy action, you still remind us that there's also a balanced game that needs to be happening on still focusing on research, because that's going to be the next part of knowledge that we want to bridge in looking forward. I also like how you talked about streamlining, and I see a potential tension because you also earlier spoke about competition, so there needs to be contestability of ideas and at the same time clarity. So what I take home from this is that we need to walk the hallways of the MC building, the main complex. We also need to cross the street to 19th Street and go over to the fund. And these sort of geographical images bring me to the question that I have for Graziella, because geographically that global is in Italy. And one of the ideas that you all spoke to is to really leverage local capacity. So Graziella, you're the head of one of the most influential policy outlets in Italy. What advice do you have for that global? What do you think that you can offer from your experience? And feel free to talk about do's and don'ts. Thank you.
Thank you again. It has already been said, but I would like to remark, talking about location, that Rome is at the heart of the Mediterranean, which is crucially at the border between very rich and very poor countries, which implies that international migration is a very deeply felt issue. And in fact, I am personally eager to learn about the report later this afternoon. But much more specifically, talking about location, we were thrilled as EIF to discover that we will be actually sharing office space with the DEC Global. So what has been going on, we have a main location which is actually very close to the location that has been chosen, which is actually very close to the Bank of Italy, walking distance, and to the Ministry of Economics. We were trying to expand, with caution our activities, because as I was mentioning, we have many visitors, we have some students needing office space, and as I said, we were thrilled to discover that we will be sharing a large office building, which the Bank of Italy generally found for us